Chapter 10. So I got a little sob story for you. uh, where I was living out in the mountains, where Tomas would visit me, it was mainly just me out there a lot of the time. And I was driving a car, my first car ever that I owned, it was a Saab. And one day I drove an hour away to go to Santa Fe to take a dance class. And when I was coming back that evening, I don't know, 10 o'clock at night, dark, in the middle of the desert, and the car breaks down. The transmission goes out of it. And I had a choice. I'm either going to sit here and cry about it and freeze my butt off or try and sleep in my car until I can get help the next day, or I could, this is before cell phones, or I could hitchhike. So I decided, you know what? I have no choice. I'm going to have faith. I'm going to make the best of this, and I'm just going to believe it's going to be okay. And, being put in situations like that where you have to make hard choices is really a gift, because I chose faith, and it worked beautifully. I got picked up by a trucker. So I'm out there on the side of the road in the dark in my miniskirt and t-shirt, hitching it. And a trucker picks me up, and when I got in the truck, I was like, "Hi, how you doing?" And he just looked terrified. I think he was expecting whoever it was to be a lot more timid and scared. And like it almost seemed like he was thinking, "What is she going to rob me? Like, what's going on here?" But it was all totally cool. He drove me to the end of my road where I lived. It was a dirt road. He dropped me off there at the end of the road. And I had to walk in the dark to my house on this dirt road, and there were no lights anywhere. It was pitch black. I could barely see my feet. I couldn't see my feet, actually, when I was walking. But it all worked out great. And that was a big life-changing experience also, because there were many times in my future where I started to really trust that I could use faith and that it would work. So the lady who owned that house ended up selling it, and so I didn't get to live in it for very long, and I moved back to Albuquerque. Tomas and I started living together in a rented room at one place, and then he bought a school bus that someone had painted completely white, painted petroglyphs all along the side, put a sunroof in the top and a big bed underneath it, and he wanted us to go on a trip to Mexico. And so we drove down to El Paso, and on the way down there, it broke down so many times, and his way of fixing it was to duct tape parts back together. And one time he was on the side of the road trying to fix it, like he had to take the battery out and put it somewhere, and someone called the cops on him because they thought he was stealing the battery, which is really a shame that he got profiled like that. Then we went and stayed with family of his that was right over the border in Juarez, and border towns are kind of nasty, and it was hard for me because the family that we stayed with, it was just, the guys were really macho, the women were kind of like their little slaves, and I didn't like it. And then we took a bus all the way through Mexico, and I was sick. I started getting sick a lot of the time, and I was kind of miserable. But it was amazing. There were towns that were trashy and nasty, and then we went through towns that were just phenomenal, like so much art, so much beauty, like villages, traditional Mexican art. It's incredible, the pottery and the colors, and as we got further south, the food became more like indigenous food as opposed to just very commercialized Mexican food. So a lot more black beans, a lot more handmade tortillas. I had tacos with squash blossoms in it. And we took a bus through the mountains in the very south of Mexico, and it started snowing. We were so high up, and the bus stopped, and some natives got on the bus, and they were wearing these wool ponchos, and they were totally in bare feet, and there was snow on the ground. And that really struck me. It was just like a whole nother world, and that humans could walk barefoot like that, and especially in the snow. Little did I know that 30 years later, I'd be trying to live like them. And Then we went through Palenque and San Cristobal de las Casas, which was in Chiapas, the state which was right on the border of Guatemala. And that was a really magical time. There were pyramids in the jungle in Palenque. There were monkeys in the trees. It was just lush. And so many of the places we passed through were not the trashy commercialized parts of Mexico that I'd seen up north. They were just pure magic. It was really, really incredible. And as we started coming back up through Mexico on a return trip, we went through Oaxaca, and there was just phenomenal basketry and artistry there. And that it was all just a very mind expanding experience. And when we came back to New Mexico, I didn't know that I was pregnant while we were on this trip. So it was the beginning of my pregnancy. And so that was part of the reason I was sick a lot. When we came back, we got a studio apartment in Albuquerque near the university, and Tomas fixed it up really cool. He had all his instruments and his carvings and his eagle feathers that he was given from a native at the Pueblo. And he was just he had such a sense of art and earthiness. Oh, and I forgot to mention in an earlier chapter how I mentioned that my room in my first apartment was all white, everything was white. Well, when Tomas started coming to see me there, he would bring me all these really colorful things and just put them in there because he really got like that I needed to like have some color in my life. I mean, he changed me in really positive ways. He also, I was mad at him for this for a while, but he also kind of made me stop reading so many books. And actually that was really good because reading was like an escape. I just lived in my head, and I was not very grounded, and he was a grounding force, and he brought me down into the depths of all of my emotions, the good ones and the bad ones. I experienced such incredible, phenomenal highs with him, and really, 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 really low lows. And that was what I needed to go through to come back down to earth and to heal myself. I was in an enormous amount of denial. So in this studio apartment that we lived in, that's where I had my son. I didn't know it, but I was hypoglycemic because my diet was just so out of balance. I would drink lots and lots and lots of fruit juice and not eat sometimes. And I ended up, when I went into labor, I ended up having a seizure. And so I had to go to the hospital, and they thought I had eclampsia, which is toxemia, but I knew that it wasn't that. And I researched it, and it turns out, yes, it was from the hypoglycemia. And so I brought my little baby home, and so in love and so new to being a mom. And I, at the time, had been dancing a lot. Before my son was born, I started teaching African dance classes because the lady who used to teach wasn't teaching anymore, and I had gotten really good at it, and people started asking me to teach. And although it's weird, to have a white girl teaching African dance, there were no black people in New Mexico teaching or doing African dance at that time. And so I started teaching. So the day before my son was born, I was actually dancing. And after he was born, I was teaching classes, and I would just go to the side and nurse him while I was teaching the class. He was with me everywhere. So he was in my belly when I was dancing to the drums. He was in the room when the drums were playing, when I was dancing and teaching my class. And it wasn't too long before he started playing drums on every pot and pan he could find in the house when he was just a tiny baby. So my classes are getting bigger, and I'm starting to bring in people who are African or African American that are African dancers, because I wanted to learn, and B, I wanted to promote Black people doing this. So I even traveled around too. I went to Chicago, I was in New York, I was in New Orleans taking African dance classes. And I was at a workshop in New Mexico, and I can't remember if it was one that I hosted or someone else did, but it was an African dance class and workshop. And I was there dancing, and a Haitian woman approached me, and she's like, "Hi, I'm Fofo. I own the Caribbean restaurant here. I really like your dancing. Do you want to come perform at my restaurant?" So I did, and it was just me freestyling, and then I had 3 drummers with me. Tomas was one of them, and people loved it. She loved it, and they were like, "Oh, she said, put a group together. I'll get you shows." So I found 3 other girls at the time and trained them. One of them was from Uganda, was a part of Africa that was totally different style of dance that I was doing. I was specializing in West African dance. And another white American girl, and then another Black American girl. And I taught them, and we started performing. We started doing a lot of shows, playing at the fairs, playing in front of the city, playing at schools, lots and lots of shows. And I even was hired for Black History Month at the Kirtland Air Force Base. They hired me to do an African dance performance. And it was pretty wild because after I finished the performance, the lady that hired me, who was African American, got up there and says, "Well, I bet you guys were expecting a Black girl up here." And I actually had audience members come up and thank me for taking them back to their roots. It was kind of surreal. And, that wouldn't fly in a lot of other places where there's actually a Black population doing African dance, but we're talking almost 30 years ago in New Mexico. And I loved it so much. I was just really excited to have that opportunity to dance. In fact, a woman moved to New Mexico, to Albuquerque, who did a variety of different styles of African diaspora dancing. So she did Afro-Cuban, she did Afro-Brazilian samba, and she did Afro-Caribbean. And she had performance groups for all of those styles, and she hired me. So I was now dancing with 4 different groups. And on top of that, there was a local band, an Afro pop band, and they were all white. And the leader of it had spent time in Zimbabwe, and he played with some of the top African, musicians. And he came back and started playing this Afro pop style music, and he needed backup singer dancers. So I was also singing and dancing with them. And having the time of my life, and my son was coming to all of these performances and being in all of the classes and just being exposed to a lot of music. His father and I were having a lot of problems, and basically what happened was that, there was, first of all, the lack of trust because of the way we got together, but there were a lot of other things, I'll spare you all the details. There were a lot of things that when I started to stand up for myself to him, it really didn't go well. He was not capable of having a conversation about, things I thought were abuse and that I wanted him to stop doing. And so he started kind of soothing himself with other women, flirting with other women, because I just kept, fighting with him or pushing him away or trying to deal with these issues. And he was worshiping his pot. He spent a lot of time smoking, and I didn't know that till we moved in together, that he smoked pot. And, me being all puritanical, I wasn't really a fan of that. But on top of it, it kept him in a place where he didn't have to deal with the emotions that were coming up, and I was always angry. And he was always telling me how uptight I was. And I was uptight, but that was because I felt abused and I was angry about it. And then when I try and tell him, he would just get high, or he would go flirt with other women or whatever, and which made me even more angry. So I eventually started breaking up with him. And when I say started breaking up with him, it was like back and forth kind of thing. And I broke up with him at one point, and I got asked to go down to Miami to model. And so I was going to leave my son with him, go to Miami and model. And before I went, I started thinking about Joe again. So I tracked down where he was. His agency had an agency in LA, and I wrote a letter. And just because had grown more and I wanted to express feelings that I had never expressed to him. So I wrote a letter basically saying, I never had the balls to tell you how I felt before, and you really changed me and moved me, and I just want you to let you know there's someone out here that cares about you. And I left it at that. I sent him the letter, and a couple weeks later, I'm in Miami. And I'm walking down the street in Miami, and who do I run into but one of my roommates from Paris, who was also the same girl that was in Munich when we did the Ouija board thing, but she left the room. And like 6 years later or something, and she had become a yoga instructor, and she was on this total spiritual trip now. And she was like, Sarah, you're never going to guess who I was roommates with last summer in LA. And I'm like, who? And she's like, Joe. And I was like, oh my God, wow. So while I was in Miami, she told me about this workshop that she wanted me to go to with her. It was called Getting in Touch with the Deep Feminine. And we went to this workshop, and it was a powerful experience where we did a lot of breath work, kind of similar to what I did at that farm in Texas, or the ranch in Texas, sort of like that. But doing this breath work, I had really deep feelings of passion and anger come up, because the anger came up because I felt my passion had been suppressed, that I had an enormous amount of passion that I didn't feel I was allowed to express, whether from the violence of my childhood or because of religious stuff or because of society. I don't remember, but it was huge. And after I purged all the anger and I started feeling all the passion and the energy, I felt my body wake up in ways that I had never felt before. In fact, after that, I had so much sensation in my sexual organs that my sex drive was off the hook, like off the hook. And when I went back to New Mexico after this, I ran into my son's father. Well, I didn't run into him. I saw him again, and we rekindled some stuff. And I actually scared him because I was so sexual. And one of the problems we had in our relationship was I felt used by him. I felt like he just was all about sex and didn't care about my feelings. And suddenly, and I was just pushing him away sexually, and suddenly I'm like on fire, and that didn't go well with him. I thought he'd be excited about it, but he really wasn't. And I get a phone call from the girl that I ran into in Florida that took me to this workshop after I get back to New Mexico, and she's like, Sarah, guess who showed up in Miami right after you left? Joe. And I had told him in the letter. No. Oh, that's what happened. When I got back to New Mexico, my roommate, because I wasn't living with Tomas, my roommate told me that a guy had called me while I was gone, because I did leave my phone number in the letter, and he told the guy that I was in Miami modeling. And then he showed up there. But my friend, she was like, he acted like he didn't really remember who you were. And she's like, I just don't think you would like him. You know, he's a pretty big stoner. And she's like, I don't think you would like him.